You are on assignment.
Now, a behind-the-scenes look. Welcome, everybody. We are back again. Alex Villarreal with Imran Siddiqui taking you on assignment with the Voice of America.
Protests turned violent on the streets of Cairo. We'll talk to our correspondent there for more.
The Africa Cup of Nations is underway. We'll hear from a VOA sports reporter who knows the tournament well.
Then why Russia is banning U.S. families from adopting its children. We'll get the story from Moscow.
And later, it's off to Hollywood for a behind-the-scenes look at the Academy Awards. We'll take you backstage with our infotainment team.
Aha, you don't want to miss that one. So let's go on assignment.
Egypt recently marked 2 years since the start of the revolution that toppled 30-year President Hosni Mubarak. But people are far from satisfied, and the anniversary was met with severe street protests across the country.
Egypt's new government, dominated by the Muslim Brotherhood, is facing a popular backlash. Critics say a new constitution backed by President Morsi fails to protect human rights and to curb the power of the military.
VOA's correspondent in Egypt is Elizabeth Erupt. We turn to her for more on this latest unrest. Let's take a look.
The biggest violence that we're seeing is in a city called Port Said in the north of Egypt. And the violence there was affected largely by a ruling on a football riot last year. And some of the Port Said fans were sentenced to death because of this riot. That brought out a lot of young, angry men on the street in a much more violent and confrontational challenge to the police, including being armed. And so that has taken a very violent element that has not really been seen before.
Well, you've mentioned, Elizabeth, about the tensions that exist in Egypt between the secular segments of the society and the more traditional Islamists in the new government. Tell us a little bit about that. Is that a part of what's going on?
I think what we've seen is just a general reassessment of where Egyptians stand 2 years after the revolution. And I think there's a lot of disappointment. People thought that this would usher in a sort of greater economic prosperity and social justice and a lot of things that 2 years on have not happened. And a lot of people are blaming the Muslim Brotherhood, who have largely taken leadership roles in politics, the presidency, parliament. And without seeing them make these concrete, perhaps quick fix, just anything really to show an improvement in their daily lives, it has really exacerbated the tensions between the majority of non-political, non-religious political groups and the Muslim Brotherhood. On top of that, of course, 2 months ago when the Brotherhood pushed through a no constitution, that also really, really bothered people and thought that that was not a democratic process.
Now, Elizabeth, with the initial uprising, what we saw a lot of participation by young people. We saw a huge movement on social media, which was really unprecedented. Are we still seeing the same groups participating now in these protests?
It is perhaps less broad-based than it was 2 years ago. Again, angrier, but less people are taking to the streets, and certainly the mood is less joyous. You don't see the families that came out. For one, it's more dangerous. We've seen rioting here in Cairo as well. And so people, and unfortunately, a huge uptick in rape, sexual assaults of women on the square. So it's got a very different feeling. Now, that doesn't undercut the amount of discontent people are feeling around the country. But how it's to play out, people are tired of perhaps the consequences of these street protests. It means that less tourism revenues coming in, less foreign investment, and for some people, they may be mad at the Brotherhood, but they're willing to give them a little bit of a chance to at least settle down and try and improve some of these basic conditions. So it's really split. They may be, one hand really liking the revolution, but thinking that they have to sort of just move ahead at this point.
From your vantage point, Elizabeth, you're there on the streets talking to people on the ground. What do you see? I mean, what do you think is the future of Egypt?
Well, that's the big question right now, and certainly some people are concerned, or at least warning about an incredible polarization. I think one of the things about Egypt, and people always talk about it as a fairly moderate country, that you might not see the kind of extremes that we have seen in Libya or Syria or Iraq. never can predict these kind of things, but there is a sense of moderation that even though we're seeing these clashes, it's a very large country, it's 80 million people or more, and these do involve, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands at their most. So it's not representative of everybody, and I do think there is a great desire just to see some basic improvements in daily life, and people will be willing to work toward that.
And Elizabeth, what are the potential consequences across the region if, as some Egyptian officials have warned, the state collapses because of this new wave of protests?
Look, and I think when the army said that, it was more just a warning that really everybody settle down. And again, I think that might reflect a large part of Egyptians' general sentiment on this, that this is only hurting Egyptians. Now, obviously, if it did fall apart, it would be disastrous for the region, and Egypt obviously as well. It is the largest Arab country and has been traditionally sort of the center of politics and kind of a neutral player when we look at the other regional tensions between Sunnis and Shiites, especially across the Gulf, including Iran, that Egypt has been sort of an honest broker to some extent in that, as well as being a key player in regional relations with Israel, being the first one to recognize Israel and continuing with the peace treaty. So obviously the consequences would be huge. Again, I don't know how many people are thinking that's seriously a possibility, at least at this stage.
VOA's Elizabeth Erupt in Cairo. Thanks again to Elizabeth for her reporting.
We'll be taking a break now, but before we do that, we have a surprise for you. An exciting opportunity for you. VOA is having a photo contest, and the winner gets a brand new iPad.
Which is not a bad prize.
It's not a bad prize
at all.
Yeah.
All you have to do is send us your best photos that capture the people and places in your life. For more information, you can go to voanews.com/iPad. The contest ends February 21st, so hurry up and get your entries in.
Okay, coming up, VOA's Sunny Young joins us to talk about Africa's biggest soccer tournament. You're watching On Assignment.
South Africa is hosting this year's Africa Cup of Nations soccer tournament known as AFCON. Though attendance at the games in Johannesburg has been nothing like what it was for the recent World Cup, there is no shortage of colorful fan spirit and evidence in Joburg. I learned this actually by reading the Sunny Side of Sports blog at voanews.com, and we are joined now by Sunny Young. Welcome, Sunny.
Thank you, Alex.
So this Africa Cup holds such a special place in the hearts of Africans across the continent. Why is that?
Part of it is the significance of the tournament. It's on par with the World Cup in that it's kind of like Africa's version of the World Cup. It's an African championship tournament for the best teams on the continent. More than 50 teams start out hoping to get to South Africa, and at the end only 16 qualify. So it's kind of a long process, but it does capture the attention of many fans.
Now, you reported on the low turnout, though. Why are we seeing such low numbers in the stands?
Part of it, Alex, is socio-economic. The World Cup that South Africa hosted 3 years ago attracted much more of an international audience, people with disposable income. This tournament, teams that support, say, Nigerians or people that support Burkina Faso, they might not have the means to travel all the way to South Africa.
Well, I want to get to, I'm sure everyone's noticed what we have sitting in front of us right here, so I want us to talk about this. What is this called? You've been to the Africa Cup yourself, and this is something that you brought back.
This is actually rather controversial. It's a plastic horn, and these are the national colors of South Africa. They are blowing this horn at the tournament in South Africa.
And you're going to blow it for us, right? We'd like to get a demonstration, yes.
However, they don't allow these horns in a lot of stadiums around the world. Like the English Premiership does not allow these horns. Many stadiums in the United States do not allow fans to bring in these vuvuzelas because they're rather annoying and loud. But,
let's get a demonstration of just how annoying and loud are they.
I'll try to give it a good toot.
Okay, let's do it.
Kind of sounds like
great.
an elephant.
Yes,
almost.
but I can imagine that would be distracting if you're. I can imagine how distracting that would be if you're a player.
If you have the say 70,000 of those blowing at the same time, it can be very, very loud.
Well, that is something. Sunny, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Sunny Young, VOA sports reporter. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, a look at what many people in Russia are saying is a bad move by the government. You're watching On Assignment. Russia's parliament singled out the United States recently in voting to no longer allow Americans to adopt Russian orphans. But the vote triggered some of the largest protests Moscow has seen since President Vladimir Putin was inaugurated last year.
We got in touch with our Moscow bureau chief, Jim Brook, to find out why the adoption issue has stirred up passions in Russia. Let's start with a look at part of Jim's report.
Russia's new law banning American adoptions of Russian orphans is polarizing Russians into two camps, pro-West and anti-West. Businesswoman Anna Glukova accuses Russia's parliament of voting for the ban to distract attention from the case of Moscow lawyer Sergei Magnitsky, whose unpunished murder has drawn international criticism.
The actions of the Duma upset us. It is scandalous to use orphan children to cover up the murder of Magnitsky. They are ready to sell their conscience. We are not. That is why they are there and we are here.
The unsolved murder of a Russian lawyer. What does that have to do with the adoption controversy or the adoption ban?
It really has nothing to do with it, Imran. A very good question. And it's basically beating the kids to make up for the fact that they can't prosecute a terrible death or murder that took place in a Moscow prison about 3 years ago. It was the Russian lawyer for American hedge fund who, according to his company, refused to participate in a shakedown that added up to maybe $250 million. And they put the heat on him. They kept him in jail. And they abused him and they deprived him of medical care. And about 10 days before he had to be released from jail for a year, apparently they tied him up and beat him to death.
Tell us a little bit about these protests that are going on the streets, and some of the critics have implied that these protests were started or ignited by the U.S. government. Is there any truth to that?
Of course not. I mean, this is an open society, and people are growing. 15% of Russians traveled to Europe last year. 50% of the population's on the internet. They get different sources of information, and there's a genuine homegrown opposition movement here in favor of democracy, in favor of straight, clean elections, and a diverse, open press. The way the government tries to delegitimize them is to say they're funded or inspired by outside powers, by the U.S. government, but that's false. What was very interesting about this adoption rally is that the rallies had kind of lost heart because very repressive measures taken by the government, fines of up to $10,000 for legal protests, this sort of thing. But the adoption rally was really nonpartisan. Once again, I say it's normal people. The communists weren't there, no red flags. The nationalists weren't there, no black flags. Just moms and dads and grandparents and teachers and nurses, normal people out there protesting a measure taken by the government that really will hurt children.
Duma Deputy Evgeny Fedorov was scornful.
The participants of the recent protests in Russia, I see them as strange people because they support selling our own children overseas.
But tell me something, has there been any horror stories in the past with regards to these adoptions that the government would take them as examples and say, look, this is what happened in the past and that's why we don't want these adoptions to continue?
Exactly, Imran. That's what they took. They took the 19 cases where the kids died. There's one where the man went to work and forgot his son in a car in a hot parking lot, and the poor child died. And it was a tragedy, and the man was negligent and was not convicted of anything, as far as I know. They've taken these 19 cases out of 60,000 and blown them way up out of proportion. What they ignore is the fact that about 1,500 Russian children adopted by Russian parents have died in recent years at the hands of their Russian parents. So grown-up boys and girls know that it's a great ticket for a Russian orphan to be adopted by an American family. Unfortunately, mortality rates are much higher among Russian families, and there are a lot more cases of children being returned, which is terribly traumatic for a child to be adopted and then sent back to the orphanage. The American family adoptions have a much better record, but the government, because they're building up this anti-American campaign in an effort to shore up their own popularity, they've been hammering away on these 19 cases.
So anyone from any other part of the West can adopt these kids except the American families?
Yes, even the foreign minister on Wednesday said there are no problems with European adoption. So 150 million American parents are bad, including me. I'm a parent.
They are coming. This year's Academy Awards in Los Angeles on February 24th, honoring the best in film. Steven Spielberg's Lincoln leads the pack with 12 Oscar nominations.
But Spielberg is getting some stiff competition this year from Ang Lee, whose Life of Pi is up for 11 awards, and VOA will be there as usual, like every year, represented in part by a team from our Indonesian service.
Yes, our team has been following the Oscars every year. They've been on the red carpet before, and I sat down with them to find out what it's really like to mingle with the stars. So, as they say in Hollywood, lights, camera, action. I am sitting here with the Indonesian Services Red Carpet team. Thank you so much for joining us. We are talking to them about the upcoming Academy Awards and also, of course, their experiences at past awards shows. I think something that a lot of people who watch these shows at home pretty much every year, they want to know, what's it actually like to be on the red carpet? What can you tell us? What's something that we don't get to see?
Before we set our foot on the red carpet, there's a lot of homework that you have to do. Like, you have to know all these nominees, you have to know all these Best Pictures nominations, and you need to know what they do.
Kita tunggu-tunggu George Clooney ada di depan Steven Spielberg, sutradara.
So there's a full dress rehearsal actually that they do the day before the show. Fifit, can you tell us about that?
Yes, that happens like a day before. And what happened was, on that day, there was a thing that they call double body. Why I knew it was double body, I actually approached one of them.
You show us who you are today.
I'm Ryan Reynolds.
It's like blocking, so they have to know where they have to stand and pose for the paparazzis and the photographers and all that. That's a double body. And besides that, there's also a general rehearsal for even big hosts like Ryan Seacrest.
And last year you got to speak to Ryan,
yes,
right?
we spoke a while with Ryan.
When do you sleep?
I'm going to sleep in 2 hours. I'm going to take a quick nap, but I don't have all the jobs. I mean, you took one from me. I auditioned for this and I got turned down.
There's so much attention paid to the fashion of the stars, but you also have to pay close attention to your own fashion.
Everybody has to wear the tuxedo, and I don't like tuxedo, especially because I have to work. You know, wearing all those, the black, and then put in a tie here. And at the same time, you have to hold the camera, and you can't leave the spot, right?
Yeah,
we can't leave the spot.
You can't see, because if you leave the spot, it's gone.
That's it.
Somebody will take the spot.
So something behind the scene that we have to prepare, of course, for hosts is your voice, because you have to scream like more than 7 decibels, I would say, because if you don't scream their names, they won't catch you.
George! Say hi to Indonesia! Say hi to Indonesia! Please say hi to Indonesia, George!
Hello, Indonesia!
Talking about getting the attention of these stars when you're on the red carpet, who's the nicest?
I like George Clooney. I mean, he is a nice person in front of the journalist, and I think that, you know, the
afraid of screwing
expression that he has is very genuine, and he's easy to talk to.
Well, listen, once you go to Hawaii, you put on a Hawaiian shirt and some khaki pants, and you're pretty much prepared.
Which celebrity is the one that gets typically the biggest response?
I would say the celebrities that are fashionably late. Okay, the Brangelina came late, right, when you were there, so they always get the most scream, most shout out.
Some artists, they were really familiar with Voice of America too. So it's like Jen Seymour, when you talk with her from, oh, you're from the VOA, you know, so like, okay,
great.
and then we talk.
And speaking about the reverse of that, what is the interest abroad in these Hollywood films and these events?
Most of the affiliates, they like it. They like it because it's like VOA closer to the artist. That's the key point.
The nominees will be read in no particular
When Seth
order.
MacFarlane announced the nominations, was there anything that surprised you?
Surprise, well, there's a lot of underdogs going up, we would say. And then Argo got in, even though Ben Affleck didn't get in. I think it was a bit of a disappointment to him. And the big surprise was to everyone was the 85-year-old and the 9-year-old nominee for Best Actress that also got in.
Do you have any predictions yourselves about who might win?
I think it's going to be Lincoln because this is America and, you know, everyone is so patriotic.
Selves of slavery, this amendment is that cure.
Well, thank you so much. This has been fascinating to learn about all that goes into covering an event like this. Yeah, I know our viewers will be interested. I have been very interested. I've learned a lot today. So thank you again to our Indonesian red carpet team.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And our thanks to Debbie Fiffit and Nada of our VOA Indonesian service. We know they're going to have a lot of fun covering this big event.
Now, speaking of movies, China has suddenly become the world's second largest market for them after North America. And box office revenues in China are growing every year. VOA's Michael Sullivan has that story.
What's going on? A foreign army invaded the United States in last year's remake of Red Dawn. But producers made a change before the film was released. The story of Americans fighting off invaders originally had Chinese soldiers as the villains. Now they're North Koreans, so Chinese audiences or censors are not offended. Some big action films also have a China connection. The upcoming Iron Man 3 was partly filmed in China, and its script was subject to scrutiny by Chinese officials. And Chinese sensibilities influenced the disaster epic 2012, says Stanley Rosen of the University of Southern California. He studies China's film industry.
Even if you're not shooting in China, a film like 2012 would be very careful to include positive references to China. Negative references will simply kill the market.
The recent spy thriller Skyfall had scenes cut for Chinese audiences. And the science fiction film Cloud Atlas lost 40 minutes of its action on the cutting room floor. But Chinese audiences love big movies with special effects, so Hollywood films account for half of the receipts from Chinese theaters. China's expanding middle class has given a boost to the country's own film industry. Last year's comedy Lost in Thailand from director Xu Zheng was a huge box office success, coming in second in all-time Chinese film revenues after Hollywood's Avatar.
It's an evolving relationship, and Hollywood needs China, as the North American market has been flat. But China needs Hollywood as well, as you see with DreamWorks going in, Disney going in.
And China is coming to Hollywood. The Chinese company TCL has purchased naming rights to the historic Grauman's Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. And the Chinese conglomerate Dalian Wanda Group has bought a major American theater chain, AMC. The ties between China and Hollywood are expected to grow in the future. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
All right, and that is our show for today. I'm Alex Villarreal, signing off from Washington.
And I'm Imran Siddiqui. Next week, we'll talk with our reporter who had an exclusive interview with former Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf. You don't want to miss that one.
We'll also be talking about the global implications of President Obama's yearly State of the Union address.
And of course, we don't want to close without reminding you that you could win your own iPad. All you have to do is enter VOA's photo contest by sending us your best photos that capture the people and places in your life. And for that, you can check out voanews.com.
Exactly. It's voanews.com/iPad. The contest ends February 21st. And be sure to mention that you watch our show on assignment.
Of course. And thank you for watching. We'll catch you next time.